All right, welcome back, everyone. It looks like we've got a few more people to come over the. We'll probably be dropping in over the sessions. That's fine. So yeah, today's session's going to be fairly fast-paced because there's a lot to cover with timber. The timber's being used for so many applications for so many buildings for such a long time. There's really a lot to cover. I'll try to keep it pretty contemporary, but I also think it's fairly important for everybody to also, I guess, understand pretty much the essence of pitched roof framing as well, because pitched roof framing isn't done as much today. Like people still do it, and I'll get into its applications, but it's I'll say it. It's very important to understand if you're going to be modifying old buildings how the roofs work, because a lot of that structure is transferred down into your footings, and you have to understand where your point loads are. But first of all, we'll finish up with the timber, the material. But quickly, just before that, how are people doing with the assignment, the first one, and do you need any assistance on that direction, etc.? And don't be afraid to ask questions, because there's probably other people who have exactly the same questions. Everyone doing all right? Or give you a hand, Eric?
Yeah, all right. Our house was only built 18 years ago, so I remember most of the.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, most of how it went about, and
yes.
quite a few things have actually changed
yes.
the way things are done.
Yeah.
So you can't go back 18 years and sort of say, oh yeah, that was nice and easy.
No,
I'm surprised now if you look at the planning developments, they look the same, but there's many changes in it.
Yeah. No, certainly a bunch of changes in the development plans, and as I mentioned right at the start of the subject, there's a lot of changes slated to be happening as well. Sort of around, I think it was what was it, around 2020 or so. There's going to be some significant changes.
So this is basically sort of like you're writing a client brief and telling us the basics of what might be a building that would comply and a building that may not comply.
No, well, so the focus is more on about the provision of the services. So who do we contact to get these services? Because I think that's it can be a little bit confused in the setup that we've got, where we've got retailers and then suppliers, and it's important to understand that. It's also important to understand who has to pay for what and who's responsible for what, and where do we go?
In our case, it was all there because the house got demolished.
Yes, right, yeah.
But because we moved the driveway from one side to the other, the water meter and gas meter had to sort of be removed and then replaced in positions, and
So you would have gone through much of that.
And they even got the water meter in the wrong place.
Yeah. All right. Well, if anybody has any questions for me afterwards, that's fine. So we'll push on with timber, the material. So timber gets used both in its natural state significantly and in various sort of reconstituted states and dressed and so on. Because it's a fairly readily available, easily modifiable material. So one of those ways in which it gets modified, and I don't have any glulam here, which is I thought we used to have a bit of glulam timber about the place, but don't know what's happened to it. That's a bit of CLT, that CLT framing I was talking about previously. In a sense, it's like, well, actually no, I won't pass. Well, it's like glulam, except it differs from glulam in that this one, the grain of your timber is crossed every So every layer, the grain runs in the opposite direction, which gives you greater strength. With your glulam beams, I'll pass that around if you wish. With your glulam beams, all of your grain is still running in that one direction. Certainly, as you can see on here, we've got some sloping cuts through the the grain is on an obtuse angle, which adds a little bit of additional strength to that. But typically, your glulam beams are not designed for optimum strength. They're designed for improved strength over natural timber, but also it's about using small pieces of timber to create large pieces of timber that's still quite attractive. So used in structural senses or even for features such as that bar, etc. And they can be curved and shaped in various different ways during the manufacturing process. So has anybody seen glulam beams used inside houses as structural elements, as expressed?
Yeah, I'm surprised quite a lot of it now. I thought it'd all be replaced by steel beams, because steel's just so much easier. But I don't know. There's a lot of these dog bone type timber.
You're talking this, that type of thing, yeah. So
they all sort of look like they're going to be used as architectural exposed beams.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, so a bit more acceptance of that as an aesthetic. Yeah. So, I haven't seen that too much, but also, to be honest, I haven't been on as many sites in last few years. Most of my work has all been rural, so hay sheds and whatnot. So I don't get to see use
I think it's that warehouse minimalist look. Bare concrete floors and a lot of people like it, and seeing that exposed timber.
Yeah. And I guess you can say the same sort of thing for LVLs as well. They can be expressed, but typically it's been things like the glulam beams, which have been used as expressed timber. When your natural pieces of timber this size just get way too expensive and too hard to get in that sort of section. Also, on engineered timber. So this one here is an LVL. That's laminated veneer lumber, which is like a massive section of plywood that's made from all these thin slices or flitches of timber, and that's quite strong because once again you've got your grains running in various different directions. And
what's something about thick being useful?
Lintel. I used a piece of LVL like that to create a mezzanine. So, being straight across the front to span 4 metres or so.
They use those in your
So your high joist. So and I'll pass around the high joist now as well, and you'll see the similarities. So essentially it's bits of LVL with a bit of plywood in the middle. So once again it's just all these tiny little pieces of wood, all the offcuts that get all mashed up, etc., or thin flitches of timber carved off, glued together to create these beams, and to create beams that are stronger than your natural piece of timber. Transfer them over to there.
I have a real problem with that.
What's that?
A lot of traders, I've been looking at these because I really wanted to use those.
Yes.
Before. I went and looked at a few houses, and when you read the spec on them, how you're supposed to fasten floor to it.
Yes.
You can't fasten directly in the centre.
You
can't fasten to the side. You can't come into it, otherwise the construction weakens that.
Yes.
And it's like missing it everywhere. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, not too sure if they're going to miss it every time. No, and no, they're not. No. And especially if you're sending large screws in there as well, it can separate that section. Although send that one around as well. Basically the same sort of concept. That type of thing I would not be too concerned about fixing into the top. Also, MDF. So medium density fiberboard also gets used a lot in construction. I noticed somebody wrote cancer on the back of this one. So there's a reason for that. Well, it is like I feel fine about passing it around, but for people who are continuously using that stuff and cutting that without breathing protection, it's it's pretty bad for your lungs.
Yeah, and I've used it, and the dust ends up like mud in the mouth, and you can't get it out.
Yeah. So if you're cutting that, certainly use a dust mask, and yeah, because you do get lots of tiny little fibres from it.
But it's got a formaldehyde content in it as well.
Right.
So, but I'm surprised how much formaldehyde there is in a lot of products. Well, once your house is built, you'd be surprised how much of it is in there.
Yeah, it's probably something I've got to look into a little bit more. I don't have any particle board to pass around. Actually, do I have some hardboard speed bracing? Sorry, hardboard bracing, I think I do. Well, that's masonite. Yeah. So, there we are. So that's typically used for bracing. We'll talk about bracing a little bit later on. And I don't have any core board to pass around.
How much of this is actually classified as being structural? Like, I can't see particle board being a structural timber. Like you wouldn't use it for bracing, would you?
Well, you use OSB for bracing, which is a type of particle board. I don't have any OSB here either. Although I saw somebody. For those that drove into the car park from South Road today, you would have gone past a whole delivery of OSB. It's on a big, just back past there. That's used for bracing, which is larger particles as well. It's all about how well it's bonded together. So timber is visually graded, both for strength and for aesthetics. Keep flicking through because we've got a lot to cover. Keep going. You've got various different grades. So select grade, so uniform wood with few natural features, such as that looks like Tassie oak, through to high grade or high feature grade. Depends on what you want for what application. As we covered last week, it depends on where the piece of timber is cut from the log as to how it will behave when it loses and takes up moisture. These are some of the results you get from timber which has been improperly seasoned or exposed too much to moisture or dried too quickly. So you've got bow, fairly self-explanatory. Spring, which is when the timber curves sideways. Twist, also known as propellering, and cupping. So cupping and twist probably the most common that you'll see. There are ways to deal with that in framing, and I'll chat about that a little bit later. But the best way is select your timber well, so you've got a nice straight piece of timber. keep going through that. Some common joints you may see. Well, probably the most common out of all of these is the half-housed joint. As another student in another subject, we spend a lot of time, on building sites, working as a carpenter, etc., in concrete and whatnot. He laments that a lot of timber framing has been very dumbed down in the last sort of 10 years or so, and a lot of these, a lot of the more intricate skills have been lost, and certainly one of those are things like mortise and tenon joints in timber, and your various other different joints. Overlap, of course, is something you'll see a lot in house framing, but many of these other joints you won't. Also, because we do have a lot to cover today, I am sort of flicking through these a little bit selectively as well. So for what we don't cover in the class, although it's all up there for a reason, it's all great material, and I strongly suggest you spend a bit of time having a look at all this stuff in your own time. But because there's a lot to know about timber, we've got to move fairly quickly on that. Very important thing about timber is making it durable. So timber can last for centuries if it's well protected. In my travels, I stayed in a barn which is 500 years old. Not many buildings built today are going to be making it to that sort of age. So anything that may cause deterioration of timber during service and reduce long-term performance, that are the durability hazards. Includes things such as weathering, chemicals, fire, etc. All types of timber for their use come under hazard classings. Certainly, we can protect against weathering by coatings and also through detailing. Beyond the weathering, we've also got biological hazards. So this one's probably something that a lot of people have seen: fungal attack on timber as a result of moisture. And so here we get moisture that's been creeping under those purlins onto that beam, and we've also got probably a beam just using its natural, it has its natural durability, so it's not treated, and it doesn't have any resistance to fungus. So if we get continued moisture attack, then it decomposes fairly well. Termites also, possibly around South Australia, people have seen the result of termites. So they hollow wood out from the centre. Termites don't like sunlight, so they'll stay in the dark and they'll eat timber from the inside. And sometimes you can even hear it happening. In one housemate of mine heard this noise in his bedroom at night when everything was super quiet. Turns out it was termites eating through the floorboards, eating longitudinally underneath. And when they were getting up to the polish on the top of the floorboards, making that noise, trying to pull the timber off of that. Also, marine borers. So there are various different types of timber which are also resistant to marine borers. So we can't use every type of timber in a marine setting. Yeah, has anybody heard of Huon pine? Yeah, well, it is.
Mostly bugs.
Yes, and there's a reason for that. Is that Huon pine is incredibly, it's very light and very easily formed, but it's actually I don't know about. I think it's resistant to marine borers, but it's also resistant to decay. So it won't decay in a marine or wet environment, which is pretty amazing for a piece of timber. But you're not allowed to cut down hue and pine because it's so rare. Yeah, because so much of it had been cut down and it grows so slowly.
Yeah, because it was mostly used for flooring in Tasmania, wasn't it? Because
was it used for flooring?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It's so expensive. You think Jarrah's expensive? Well,
yeah.
You know, if you've got that,
yeah.
gold mine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, bits of hue and pine are worth a lot of money. And has anybody here been down to Tasmania? Yeah.
Actually, I was down there last year and I went back to live in Phoenix. But we what the place? Not the one down the other stuff. What's the place? Where you go up the factory, trying to think of the place. There was a town we went to, and there's still a mill on the water.
Yeah.
It does pine. They've actually got a pepper grinder.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, so you probably leave that pepper grinder outside on your deck, and it'll be.
It gets used.
Yeah.
It smells beautiful too.
Yes, it is. Yes, a lovely. Yeah, it does smell nice as well. But if any of you are going on a holiday down to Tasmania or so, I definitely encourage you to go. There are several. Can't remember the name of the place now, but there are several places down particularly in the south of Tasmania where there are museums about timber and so on. There's so much you can learn about timber down in Tasmania because it's been a very important industry. Strawn. Yeah, right on the west.
Yeah,
west coast.
Yeah, there's a lot of people playing in between.
Yes. Yeah. But you'll see some hue and pine trees that are about this high and and they're 200 years old or something, and you think, wow, okay, that's why it's expensive because it takes thousands of years to grow. Anyhow, so all of your timber comes under various different hazard classings. That hazard class tells you what that piece of timber can be used for. So your hazard class, that doesn't necessarily relate to the natural durability of the timber. So some pieces of timber are going to be more durable than others in their natural form, but I can get a piece of pine that's H3 LOSP treated and use that outside. So that's a piece of pine which has been treated and sealed, and so it's suitable for outside and above ground. And that's how, through these hazard classings, that's how we decide on which type of timber is appropriate for the use.
Can you treat H1 to build it up, further up through?
No. No. You can certainly, what you can do is you can paint timber and you can protect timber with paints, etc. But yeah, how do I say it? Any of the treating that goes on, like so for CCA, like copper, chrome, arsenic, you're not going to do that at home. For your light organic solvent protector, you're not going to do that at home. Actually, that's pretty toxic stuff. But also just the infrastructure which is required to do that LOSP as well is about creating a vacuum, putting the LOSP in, and then increasing the pressure to get it taken up into the wood. You're not going to be doing that sort of thing at home. And by painting timber, it only lasts. That protection only lasts so long as the paint stays intact. When you get cracks and things like that, you get entry of water and fungus, etc. So, because if we flick back to where were we? This one here. So that's been painted. But we're not. Yeah. So it's not going to be a home job. Is not going to be nearly as effective as actually purchasing the right timber to begin with. So H1 inside above ground. So that's going to be your timber framing. So typically untreated. That will, if you use that in a frame in a house, it's going to last for a long time as long as it's protected from the weather. H2 also inside and above ground, but protected from wetting and is protected from borers and termites as well.
So your roof frame, where does that come in? Is that an H1 or because it's undercover? Or?
So you can use, certainly you can use H1 timber for it. A lot of timber now is H2 anyhow. You see a lot of timber frames going up that are blue colour and also a green colour. They've been treated, so they're H2. So
when it rains on it, when it's sitting in the mud on site and all that sort of thing, is there a problem with that?
Oh, yes, but yeah, I think it's certainly best to be building in good weather conditions and certainly not have your timber sitting around taking up moisture, etc. And I guess you don't want to be enclosing wet walls, particularly if if you've got a lot of moisture in your timber and then you go putting plasterboard on there. There's certainly issues with the plasterboard and the longevity of the plasterboard, but it's probably not a huge concern. You want to keep things as dry as possible, but
it seems like two steps forward and one back when they season the timber, dry it, and then they deliver it and it sits out in the rain.
Yeah, and if you keep it in the rain for a long time, well then you undo a lot of your seasoning that you've done, but it certainly takes time to do that. But yeah, I agree with you. It's it's best to keep stuff dry. Although also I've made a mistake before of getting a whole heap of recycled timber delivered and covering it over with a tarp, which you'd think, okay, that's a fantastic idea. It's not. What that created was this dark, humid environment, which is exactly what termites love. Yeah, and I was lucky to have discovered it only about 2 weeks in. So tarps off, and then separating timber, you got termites going between them. Only took off some surface stuff. It's okay, but yeah. So sometimes it's much better just to hope you get a bit wet. But you've got your different hazard classes. So H3, that's what I'd be using for verandas and fascias and pergolas and so on. So outside, above ground, moderate wetting and leaching. H4, outside and in ground. So if you're going to be doing any stumps for your deck, like timber stumps down into the ground, or any sort of small timber retaining. H5, ground contact. That's if I was doing a timber retaining wall, I'd go for H5 as opposed to H4. So it's going to withstand extreme wetting. So very severe decay, borers and termites. And then if I'm working in a marine situation, then H6. And then there's a special hazard class for marine waters south only as well. And this is about your natural durability. So that's your treated durability. So you can have timber treated in various different ways to make up those hazard classings, or there are timbers you can buy that have a high durability. So things like ironbark, cypress, turpentine, tallow wood, forest red gum. So things like turpentine, they get used for your jetty pylons. So all those massive bits of timber, that's a timber called turpentine. Quite durable, spotted gum, black butt. They get used for decking outside. And we've got got stringy bark on both of those, durable and moderately durable. But yeah, you see a significant difference between your stringy barks and things like your spotted gum and your black butt as well. So keep going through. So we've got a good summary of that already. So H2, concealed wall frames. H3, above ground. H4, in contact ground, dry ground only. Then H5 for your more, your wetter contact with ground, and then H6 for marine. So imagine I mentioned termites earlier. So termites are a significant problem, and typically the way termites are dealt with, it's by putting up barriers so that don't actually stop the termites like being able to make it to your house, but make it so that you can see when they arrive. There are more than 350 species of termites, but only 20 cause economic damage to houses. So there are plenty of termites that are benign, well, in terms of houses. So they just eat leaves and things like that, leaf litter and small sticks, etc. on the ground. But it can be quite difficult to make that determination between them. So the emphasis on current building regulations is on managing termites through barrier systems and inspections rather than employing the environmentally harmful methods of the past. So environmentally harmful methods of the past, that's things like DDT and very effective pesticides, but they they're damaging to humans, but also damaging to the broader ecosystem as well. That also another. So a lot of your steel frame houses are marketed on the basis of their resistance to termites, but a CSIRO study found that steel and masonry houses had virtually the same chances of attack as timber houses. That's because there's a whole bunch of other stuff inside your house which termites will eat. So it's timber based. So termites can also damage plasterboard, carpets, plastics, books, artworks, clothes, etc. So that's why in the National Construction Code it stipulates that you have to have a form of termite protection for every building that's built. So key priority is to provide a system that addresses the whole of the house, not just the structural elements. Termite barriers are inspection systems to stop hidden entry. They're not prevention systems stopping termites actually getting into the house. So, one way.
How do you know if the house has actually been treated if you haven't got any evidence of it?
Well, I don't know. Don't know if there are some. Like you talk about very old houses, or
with the turning mesh now, it's pretty obvious. You can see it.
Yeah.
But back in the days of just chemicals, the only proof you had was a certificate.
Mm.
And if you lose a certificate.
Yeah. Well, and as much the same now. Although I guess you can be fairly sure because it's within the National Construction Code that you need to have a termite protection system. That any house built in the last at least 10 years is going to have a termite protection system. But yeah, certainly with older houses, what they've been treated with and so on, yeah, sometimes you got no idea, like, yeah, and what you're sitting on, what the ground has been treated with, etc. And that's a problem.
Yeah. Because we just got a certificate, and that was it. It didn't say what it was treated. It just said it was treated, signature, date, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because and there's certainly more as it's come to light about the health risks of various different pesticides and whatnot. People are more concerned with that now as to what exactly has it been treated with, rather than just has it been treated. Yeah. So a very common one that you probably would have seen are these termite caps on stumps. Pass that one around. So that's to stop termites, or actually, no, it doesn't stop termites from entering the building, it just means they have to build a mud nest to get around it, to get into the building. Also, Eric just mentioned termi mesh. We've got some termi mesh back in the storeroom. I didn't think to bring that one along. I'll go grab it. I'll go grab it in a bit, actually. Actually, well, I'll just pause it and quickly go grab the piece of termi mesh as well. That one. Back in just a jiffy. So pass this round. This is a piece of turning mesh around a pipe. The way that this works is actually, I think I showed you this some weeks ago. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'll pass that around. Anyhow, yes, we covered concreting already. So that's the turning mesh, and so it's a common way of protecting around your pipes.
So is the physical barrier becoming more popular, or than chemical?
I don't know. So yeah, in the place that I worked with one of the so I worked closely with one engineer who just liked to spray everything, and so that's but yeah, so that's been a lot of my exposure to seeing what people do in the industry. But yeah, I'm as insofar as what other people choose, I'm not sure what's becoming the most popular. I certainly know what I'd choose.
Do you should you actually sort of, for the client, give them an option?
Most definitely, yeah. And so speak to them about about the various different ways that it can be done. And yeah, and if I was to advocate for a system, I'd say use something like a cordon barrier, which is the termite poison which is included within a sandwich of a plastic sheeting. So it doesn't actually go into your soil. It's locked away in that plastic sheeting for only if the termites eat their way through it. And then also in conjunction have other physical barriers with that as well. So I think it's best to probably have a couple systems working together. But yeah, what I certainly steer away from is dousing the whole soil with a pesticide. That's it's probably what I'd advocate for. Yeah, as I mentioned before, covering the sheets of covering the timber with tarpaulins, not a good idea, because it says here permanently damp ground increases the ability of termites to attack. They can more readily build mud tunnels from the ground, so they like moisture. So in that big pile of timber I had a lot of jarrah, and normally jarrah is a termite resistant timber. It's good for posts and so on in that regard. But as soon as you put it in a moist environment that's nice and warm, it softens up the outside of that jarrah, and termites actually really like to eat it. Or some species of termites really like to eat it when it's been prepared very well for them to eat. When building right up to boundary, inspections may not be possible from a neighbour's property, thus increasing the risk of hidden attack. So you've got to think about those details. What sort of termite protection do you use in that scenario? Also, when adding house extensions, the risk of attack can be increased by such problems as lack of barrier continuity, subfloor ventilation, and subfloor access. Subfloor ventilation is an important thing that quite often gets missed with additions to old houses. Old houses that have suspended timber floors have been designed to have their subfloors ventilated. And it's all too often that you get extensions put onto houses that block those vents, and you get moisture building up in the subfloor of that poorly ventilated house, and it's a fantastic environment then for termites to enter the building and enter the new construction which has gone on there. But it's not just termites; it's fungus, etc. as well. So that's if you've got to take a take-home message, think about additions. Pay heed to the subfloor ventilation of the old house if you're ever doing that. Also, high-risk sites require additional consideration for previous methods. So, high-risk sites, things like bushland and whatnot, particularly up in the hills, up around here where we've got a lot of stringy barks. Termites love stringy barks, and so there's a lot of termites in those areas where we've had a lot of stringy bark bush growing. So yeah, large and established sources of termite food and nesting near the site, established bushland, increases the likelihood of termites. Also, the further north in Australia, the greater the prevalence of termites. So everybody probably would have seen, you know, the termite mounds of the Northern Territory, etc. Fairly iconic feature. So whatever barrier system has been used, its effectiveness depends entirely on regular inspections by the building owner. No termite management system works properly without inspection. So that's, you know, that's important. Even the termi mesh stops them coming up the pipes. But what you can also have in your house is that termites will build a mud nest to get around your slab, and then once they pass your slab through a weep hole in your brickwork and into your timber frame that way. So from around the outside, that still relies on inspection. Yeah, keep. And these other ones, I encourage you to have a look through them. But also a lot of the points made in here, I'll be making with the timber structure materials in a minute. So I mentioned before that when you build a house, typically you're building from the ground up because we have to work with gravity. But when you design a house, you design from top down. So yeah, and I was just thinking about that. We've got these slides ordered in the fashion of timber floor systems and timber versus steel wall framing, etc. And then we're going down into roof framing. I think I might actually reverse that order and talk about roof framing first. And I've got several roof frames here for you to come and gather around, and we'll have a good look at how these roof frames work in practice. So jump up. So, that's the Wood Solutions wood framing, roof framing. I won't go that. I'll go the TAFE pitched roof framing. So a whole series of different types of roof are possible, and it's what sort of makes that, or typically what makes that design or architectural statement is your roof. So it's very important to understand roofs also for that fashion. So this roof here is a composite of being a pitched roof with trusses for that section, and that's also quite common as well. You may not be able to get trusses to behave in this way, or these things are difficult to do with trusses, so this section gets pitched up on site, but we want a large open area on this one and we want to save time on site, so trusses for the end. What dictates your style of roof and also your framing underneath is what you also choose to cover your roof with. With sheeting, we can go down to 5-degree pitch. Well, with this custom orb sheeting, it can be as low as 5-degree pitch. Whereas with tiles, we need to have around that 30-degree pitch. If we don't have a steep pitch with tiles, we have a leaking roof. Also, your floor plan is going to dictate what your roof design is, or sometimes your roof design chosen will dictate what your floor plan is. So if we've got just a very simple square or rectangular house, we can do a double hip end like that. But if we have an L-shaped house, then we have to have 2 hips arranged in a perpendicular fashion. When we've got 2 hips arranged in a perpendicular fashion, then we also end up having a valley in here. So we've got our hips and our valley. Sometimes one wing of the house will be smaller than the other wing. That means our roof ends up being smaller as well. So we have a major hip and a minor hip. And then this hip here is called the broken hip. And then we've got a valley once again in that. As opposed to our hips, we've got gables, and gables are certainly becoming, as we can see in this picture down here, sort of an architectural statement once again that people are going. So it's not just your traditional gable ends like this, but a lot of that has been reinterpreted in modern minimalist architecture, and also in architecture like this, which is sort of that postmodernist approach of a mash of styles, etc., and large cantilevers and so on. This particular style, though, that, as you'd probably notice, that's not a coupled roof. That one's happening through what are called portal frames, and I'd like to talk about portal frames more in subsequent lectures. So hopefully we can get stuck into those later. Another thing you'll see about the place are Dutch gables. So it didn't actually derive out of the Netherlands so much as from South Africa. So it was about the Dutch in South Africa designing for the climate there. They initially designed with the purpose in mind of ventilating the roof space. So typically associated with Dutch gables were vents like this, and then also vented eaves, whereby all the hot air rising up in the roof can be vented out of the gable and then suck air in from through the vented eaves. Although a lot of Dutch gables you see these days are simply filled in with fibre cement sheet, so it's not actually serving the purpose to which they were initially designed, and it's simply become a design feature. Skillion roofs, also another thing which is, I guess, certainly fairly popular architecturally, has been for the last 15 years or so. I think I've mentioned the architecture firm Troppo Design to you guys before. Have I mentioned Troppo Architects? Yeah. So that one's pretty typical Troppo. That's probably one of their designs, and that sort of fairly typical Troppo design as well, using skillion roofs with quite large cantilevers and lightweight framing. But also for many of you, or for any of you that live in inner suburban areas, your old areas, Parkside, Unley, all the stuff close into town, you'd probably know plenty of these skillion roofs as well, where you had your symmetrical cottage built in sort of 1905, and then in 1920 there was a skillion roof added, and then in 1940 there was the next lower skillion roof added till you get to the point where you're ducking to get out the door at the back. That's also a very popular use of skillion roofs. Something that ends up being like a combination of two skillion roofs is what's called a clerestory roof. These roofs were sort of popular in late 80s, early 90s. They also serve a very important function as well. So this is designed more around functionality rather than aesthetics. That's to have this face here with the glass facing north to enable light to get in to the back of the building. So typically, if we're looking at this building here and that's facing north, we can get, in wintertime, we can get plenty of sunlight into these front rooms, but to get sunlight into the back rooms as well, we have that section of roof carrying further and then having windows in there. It also enables ventilation. So if we get breezes in the evening from the southwest, as we do in Adelaide, that wind going over the roof can suck out that warm air through a Venturi effect out through the clerestory roof. So serves multiple sort of comfort functions in the house. And then also flat roofs. Also a very popular design aesthetic. Currently, I'll try to think of it. Sean Godsell, the architect, who's sort of very well known for building boxes with no articulation and sort of absolute minimal features. I don't know if that's probably not one of his. His are more like this sort of thing, but no visible windows. All your windows are hidden in behind the screening. But flat roofs enable this type of architecture where we have so no roof is perfectly flat. There's always a little amount of fall on a roof because you want water to go in one direction or the other. So they're normally around the 1 degree or 2 degree pitch. Because we're dealing with such small pitches in the roof, it's important that things are detailed up perfectly and they're installed perfectly. What we don't want is water flowing in the wrong direction, and it's very easy for that to happen on a flat roof. So flat roofs use materials like a decking, like clip lock and spandex, things that enable large spans between supports and have a lot of strength and get water away from where you don't want it, to enable that very low pitch. And we'll later in the course we go into our roof sheeting significantly. Bell coat roof, which is a very sort of, how do I say it, rural Australian colonial sort of style, something you'll see on farm buildings, etc., where you have a steep pitched roof and then a lower pitched veranda all the way around the outside. So that return veranda, that's about providing shade to all walls. So for people who came out here from England to a hot Australian climate, that's what they wanted, to keep everything as cool as possible. We've sort of moved away from that now in being a little bit more climate responsive, in ensuring that we get sun in winter time and minimise sun in summertime through design of north-facing windows with adequate shading. But this is also a very practical, very sensible way of designing for the hot Australian climate as well. The reason we have such a steep pitch in our roofs, well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is because it's traditional as well. In Europe, you had to have a really steep pitch to get snow off, because if you didn't have a steep pitch, then snow loads on and you can collapse your roof. So very steep pitch to allow snow to run off. But also what it does, it provides a very large space inside your roof above your ceiling. Providing a lot of volume in your roof helps keep your house cool, because it enables the hot air to rise. And that hot air rises up toward the top of your roof, up to the top here, and stays away from your ceiling. So the steeper the pitch, the more we use that effect. But then we don't want a very steep pitch for our verandas, because if we carry that pitch all the way down, like they've done in this house here, it gets incredibly claustrophobic. Your fascias end up being lower than your window head height, and certainly for people who are fairly tall, if you're standing there and your fascia is lower than your eye height, it's not a nice building to live in. It's very claustrophobic. So that's why the change in pitch for the roofs. Yeah, I won't go into that too much, and we've covered this one fairly well in our discussion. Just a quick refresher on terminology. So your ridge or ridge board, your rafter, your collar tie, which locates them together and sits just above your underpurlin typically, your ceiling joist, which ties your rafters together. This one's got what's called a pitching plate in there. Typically, that's called a top plate. And the difference between a pitching plate and a top plate is the top plate sits on top of members, whereas typically a pitching plate is fixed to the side of studs, and then something is pitched off of that. Also, I guess it's a good opportunity to say, do plenty of research on the internet, but also try to keep your sources Australian, because sometimes there's a lot of confusion around terminology, etc. And there's a lot of American terminology which differs to Australian terminology. I guess, yeah, certainly understand the American terminology as well, but understand, it's probably not a good thing to go on South Australian building sites and call things in American terms. You create a bit of confusion, particularly with the older builders. So ceiling joists, and then down in here, so that's our top plates there. This one's our strut, and so that's our vertical strut. This one's our perpendicular strut. So vertical strut, that's easy, that's vertical. Our perpendicular, that runs perpendicular to our underpurlin. And then fan strut, do we have a fan strut around? No, we don't have a fan strut, but you guys know what a fan strut looks like from our talk. And then our ceiling joists, spaced at 600 centres, very important. and they stop our rafters from spreading. Also, where we get to, like we had with that hip end there, and our rafters get very close to our wall plate, we don't have enough space for a ceiling joist to go in there, we use trimmers. Those joist trimmers are going to be the same size as our other ceiling joists. Even if they're spanning just a very short distance, use that same timber, so we don't get changes in heights of timber. Flick through these quickly. Our hanging beam, that helps support our ceiling joists at mid-span, or typically at mid-span, or wherever is convenient to go landing a hanging beam on top of a frame. So sometimes a lot of the time actually, I've specified hanging beams that sit on an angle. So not perpendicular to your ceiling joists. That's because if they were to run perpendicular to the ceiling joists, I'm landing it over top of a door or a window or something like that. Best to avoid that, do your hanging beam on an angle, but then size up your ceiling joists to the greatest span that's created by having your hanging beam at an angle. Does that make sense to everybody? So design up all your stuff for the worst case scenario, particularly if you're using 90 by 45, it's super cheap. You might as well, or if if it's 90 by 35 for your ceiling joists, but then you've got a longer span somewhere, just do it all at 90 by 45, because it's not a huge cost difference. And even your 120 by 35 is not a particularly expensive piece of timber as well. So here's another one with more terminology happening there for you. This one's got tile battens here. The battens for your roof sheeting are typically going to be around that 1200mm spacing. Now that's batten spacing in a nutshell. Once again, always refer to your sheeting manufacturer because it is dictated by the type of sheeting you use. But your tile battens, they'll be at 300 centers or 330 centers depending on your tiles, and typically they're also designed to be hardwoods as well. So you specify those as hardwood battens to enable that sort of span to carry that weight of 90 kilos per square meter. So here we've got the carpenters fixing those first rafters in with our ridge happening there. So they may be forming up hip ends with that. So that's the first bit that goes on, and they've got some. Well, it looks like they've got some ceiling joists in place there in this scenario to be standing on for getting their ridge in place. Also, your rafters need to be bird's mouthed in so they can sit on top of the top plate. So that ensures, or that really helps the fixing, and that concept is very important to understand in framing, in any sort of timber framing as well, is that what you don't want to rely on too much are your fixings. You want to rely on gravity. Gravity is very predictable, and if you can have pieces of timber which seat nicely on top of other pieces of timber, that's much better than having to rely on a nail holding things in place or a piece of steel holding things in place. That goes for any of your joints. I can't see any sort of half house joints and whatnot. But when you've got veranda posts and fascias, notch out your veranda post, slot your fascia into your veranda post rather than fixing it from the outside, because then you're relying on gravity to hold that fascia in, and then a horizontal fixing to locate it, rather than relying on that horizontal fixing, which may split the grain of the fascia and things can collapse. More terminology in regards to various different rafter members. So these are your hip rafters, and then you've got creeper rafter. Cripple creeper rafter goes between your minor hip and your valley rafters. Jack rafters. Your jack rafter is only that one in the middle that jacks up your ridge. We've got another jack rafter here for our minor hip because it's jacking a ridge there. And then all your smaller rafters that go up to your hips, they're called creeper rafters. Not expecting you to remember that all today, but definitely review this stuff in your own time and learn that terminology. It's important. So ridge board located at the top, and yeah, we'll flick through this fairly quickly. This is something we didn't see in any of the roofs that I showed you as models, because we didn't have any major hips and minor hips. So this is a valley, and in the valley on your roof you need to have a gutter of some sort. What we don't want is just roof sheeting meeting roof sheeting, where water runs down and then runs straight into your roof. So there needs to be a gutter at the valley. That gutter is simply folded up sheet metal, going to be 0.6 or 0.8 or 0.42 thick, so half a millimetre thick. That's 0.42 base metal thickness. That's just folded up, so it doesn't have a lot of strength. Your strength comes from your valley boards that support your valley gutter. So basically, it's just a type of flashing that your roof sheeting goes over top, and then has it's folded over to ensure that any water blown doesn't go inside your roof. That's stopped there, and it all runs down your valley. So under purlins that strut your rafters, roof struts to strut your under purlins, and then so vertical struts and perpendicular struts, so vertical, perpendicular, and then a fan strut. This is a very large fan strut, so that enables a point of support here and a point of support there. Note the very small under purlin that results, because we've got many points of support and we're not talking about large spans. Also, as a retrofit, there are various different tie bolt truss systems as well. This basically helps this under purlin at midpoint by providing pressure, an upwards pressure on that, and that weight is essentially transferred to these points here through that web that goes underneath. This is about sizing up strutting beams. We won't go into that. Well, we're at 12 o'clock already, so there's going to have to be some more covering of timber steel framing. Yes.
Sorry, in the photo, is it right we leave the insulation like that in the roof? Because
this one here.
One can take dust and can move inside the home and it's hatched.
Is this the photograph you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not fantastic insulation. Although I've been in plenty of roofs that look like that. Yeah. Certainly you want to be very neat with your insulation, and you want things to be packed in fairly tight so there are no gaps, because wherever you've got a gap like this, that's where your heat just goes straight through your ceiling into your roof cavity. Yes, you do need to pack your insulation in there well and have it fitting, but this scenario, that's just the access space into the roof. That's normally closed off, so that's when that one's just open. Is that was what you're asking about? Yeah. Certainly, yeah, you don't, particularly with mineral fibre and fiberglass, etc. You don't want insulation coming down into your house. But this is all typically closed off. So, thank you once again for your attendance. Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, no, you guys can go. I'll be able to quickly do the role from remembering who's here. Yeah, know your names by now. So, yeah, I'll stop.